So thank you for joining us, Ben.
Thanks
To
for having
start,
me. Thanks for the
yeah,
invite.
yeah, absolutely. To start things off, can you share a bit about your background, some of the high performance programs and athletes that you worked with, and what ultimately led you to write Output?
Sure, that's a long question, but yeah, I'll start. I'm a physiologist by training. I did some schooling at University of Victoria and then finished my PhD at University of British Columbia. Uh, while I was doing all that, I think it was probably in the very early years, Tim, when I first met you as an athlete, way back in the day. Where I was practicing as a physiologist for the Canadian, or at that time it was Pacific Sport, which moved into Canadian Sports Centers, which is now the Canadian Sport Institute Pacific. I was actually, I started my career at a pretty exciting time. It was 95 to 98, so I aged myself a little bit there. But then when the Sport Institute, it was 2001 when Canada really wanted to drive some Sport Institute models, and I think I was the first paid full-time physiologist to work in sport to drive Olympic medals for Canada at 2001. And that started in Victoria. There was a big push to build a new sports institute there. It sort of fell apart within about 7 months, unfortunately. I stayed on and continued to work. I was the one person that stayed on and continued to work until the second push came in 2004. And when we hired Gord Sleever in Victoria, and the rest is history in Canada when they got awarded the 2010 games. And so a big push came at that point. I started my career in Olympic sport working with triathlon and cycling, to be frank. I stayed with cycling from 2001 until 2012, 11. And then I worked with triathlon probably till about 2006, 2005. Took a short hiatus from them and then went back and started working with them from 2009 to 2000 leading into the London Games. Um, Worked across multiple sports, in team sports. I worked with snowboard, skiing. I did a lot of research in the space with the Canadian Sport Institutes. In about 2011, I left the Sport Institute to work out on my own. I had young kids, and traveling was becoming crazy for raising a family. And I decided to go on my own and work a bit more in professional sport while still supporting Olympians through P210 and with some national sport organizations. And so I took a job in 2018 to rebuild the Vancouver Whitecaps and build their performance strategy. So I took a lot of the principles and lessons that I learned across multiple sports and just finished that project with them as of January this year and passed it on to the hands that be to take it to the next step. So that was an exciting project. So you might see my dog come in every once in a while. Uh, I still am very involved with endurance sports. I do a lot of work in cycling, more on the private side, and same thing with some occasional athletes working in triathlon. Um, and where that led me to write the book, great next step. Well, COVID hit in 2020, and it always had been a sort of interest to potentially write a book around performance, but it was really driven from the constant questions I would have when I had chats with people either through webinars or meeting people at events, or people found out what I did, and they always say, "Well, what would you do in this situation?" And so it sort of spurred the idea of how do I think of performance as a whole and how do we bring that together and share a common language of performance. And I sort of dug back into what I've done in sport and thought about that and what I've been doing in the last sort of 10 or 15 years and applying that to all different domains of human performance. So COVID hit and we needed a project to work on because I could only go for hikes every day. And my wife and I decided to go for hikes, and she'd record what I'd say and ask me more questions and record what I'd say. And one thing led to another, and pretty soon there was a book.
Yes, that's an awesome sort of silver lining from COVID. I think it opened up a lot of really cool opportunities that way.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
So from your book, you talk about focusing on what actually matters. And for athletes, we have a lot of age group athletes, especially in 40s, 50s, and 60s. What specifically matters around physiologically or behaviorally, when preparing for endurance triathlons?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the things I try to stress in the book a lot, and it's one of the very first conversations I have, whether it's an elite person going for a world championships or whether it be an age grouper, that's just trying to figure out what they want to do. I always come back to the very first question of saying, like, being really honest, what is your performance objective as an athlete? So whether you're a professional athlete and that's all you do full time, or whether you're a recreational competitive athlete or just someone that's being active, is being really honest with yourself about what you're trying to accomplish from a performance perspective. And so that might seem really obvious, but even in professional sport, I find when I first start working with someone, that's always the question that needs to be addressed right off the bat. And because there's a misalignment between what people do and what they think they need to do with their actual goals and objectives. And I'll give you an example. I think there's probably a lot of people on this call, and I can't see everybody, but um, I think a lot of you, maybe there's a couple of professional athletes that get paid to do this. But there's probably everybody has a job, everybody's got a family, everybody's got some relationships that they have to deal with. And so when you ask me the question about what really matters, is the first point in discussion is to always ask yourself what really matters to you. Like, and when you're thinking for your performance objective, because it helps align all your actions really, really well. I see time and time again that people are chasing results and um, objectives that really aren't aligned with what they're actually doing in their lives on an ongoing basis. So that to me is the most important thing, being really clear about what that objective is. It's one thing to say I want to get a certain time in a Ironman or an Olympic try, or I want to do a certain run off the bike. But it's another thing to say I want to do that while also being successful in my career and being a great parent and being a great partner. They're two different objectives. And we sometimes only look at one of those objectives in isolation. And I think that's the most important thing to really figure out right from the get-go. After that, it's pretty easy to figure out what you really need to do.
That's a fantastic response. It's like, yeah, just setting that foundation and what's the most important value, and everyone just has a different goal, and so being clear on that is perfect.
Yeah, and
Um,
knowing it's your goal, right? And that's the most important thing because what happens, and again, is I'm going to jump back on your point there because I think it's important and it's something that comes up all the time is that, and people say, yeah, that's obvious, I get it. But what happens is it's really easy to not align your actions with what your real objective is because such and such trains like this, or this person does brick sets like this with this amount of time off the bike, and this is the longest ride that they do. Well, they might have a full 40-hour a week training schedule availability, and you might not. Like, and so, um, and I think we know that intuitively, but sometimes we put those pressures, not sometimes, we often put those pressures on ourselves. And I see people do this over and over again is trying to relate somebody else's strategy within what their domain and context is. And it happens really, really easy.
yeah, that comparison is way too easy. Um, Around on the training side of things, and targeting maybe our age group athletes or as we get older, how does the physiological adaptations to training change? So where do you see those differences compared to somebody in their 20s or 30s?
Yeah, great question. And I'm gonna say right from now, I'm living an experience on this one too, because I trade all the time. But there's two big things, right? And I like to bucket them into two main things. First of all is adaptation to training. So your training response to an adaptation. Your window for adaptation isn't as big the older you get. And what I mean for that is that there's a natural age-related decay in the primary physical training parameters, whether it be strength or VO2 max or aerobic, whatever you want to classify it as, is there is a natural age-related decay. And when I'm speaking about that decay, I'm speaking about that decay from like a peak level. So even if you're at the best in the world and you maintain that training load aspect, there is an age-related decay that's going to happen regardless, even if you maximized your training all the way through. Well, 99.9% of all people are nowhere near at that level, right? And so we're somewhere below that. And so while you might see that you can improve something if you haven't really trained before, and then you go and train, and you're like, I'm faster and I did better at that. That's true. And because you have a lot of like capacity to fit in there. But what happens though is there is a natural age-related decay in strength and aerobic fitness. And so what the to answer your question is really the room for improvement continuously gets smaller and smaller the older you get. Okay. Now, all 50-year-olds don't have the same, they might have, depending on where they fit on that curve, they might have more room for improvement than someone else, but the room for improvement for all of us starts to shrink on strength and such. So what that means is that if you're higher on that fitness curve, you have to do more work to get a small amount of change, right? If you're lower on that fitness curve, you can do less work and still get some really substantial results. But as you get older, the general rule will be that you'll have to do more to get the same amount of change. The second thing that's really important as you age is so that's load, that's training and adaptation stimulus. Well, it's recovery. You need more recovery the older you get. You don't recover as quickly. And so, even myself personally, my own training to get the same results, I actually find I need longer periods of recovery, which might have been 24 hours before in a hard session, or I could get 3 of those done in the week. Now it's 2 of those I can get done in a week. So your recovery time extends out a little bit more for those sessions. And what happens often, what I see with older athletes, and I do work with quite a few older competitive age group, mostly in cycling. But what I see happen is they still think that they should be training with the same amount of intensity sessions or volume sessions throughout a week as they did maybe even 5, 10 years ago. And then they start to stack those on top of each other over time, and they don't fully recover from those sessions. And so it starts this negative cascade of a little bit less, a little bit less, a little bit less over time. So just being aware that you do need a little bit more recovery time, and some of those recovery blocks need to be a little bit more frequent or a little bit longer. Those are the two big things I think that are important to remember.
Yeah, that's fantastic because I know recovery comes up more and more these days. It's often a neglected thing, and it's easy to neglect in I think a mindset of just we're just so busy and trying to do it all, and the work makes improvements, but is that reminder that recovery actually makes our improvements or helps us reach our goals in a equal capacity almost.
Well, yeah, and like in the group that you're talking about, when you say call it 40, 50, 60s, but let's say even go 30, 40, 50, 60s, what happens during that time in your life, right? Well, first of all, you may start a family. Your time commitments your time availability becomes less and less. Your work, if you're in a career, usually starts to get more and more responsibility the longer in your career. Sometimes it's maybe even longer hours until you get to your 60s and you've really done well. And now you start to get more of that time back, but you've also had this age impact. So that 40s, 50s, 60s, you really got to think about the recovery piece because it's not just the training load that's on you. You've got all these other loads that are presenting on you as well.
Absolutely. In output, you emphasize reducing noise and paying attention to the meaningful signals. For athletes, what are the clearest early signs that your body needs rest before an injury occurs? And which indicators do triathletes tend to overlook?
With triathletes, oh boy, that's a tough one for them. But I think the biggest one I'd say is, you know, there's two things. First of all, there's things that happen that you will never notice until they're gone. So for example, if you're getting a blood metric that's changing or something in your body's changing, it's really hard to detect some of these early physiological signals perceptually by yourself. I think regular blood work is important if you're doing a lot of endurance training, and I would say at the very least it should be annually. But if you're doing it, really big, intense training blocks for extended periods of time, then I would look at every 3 to 6 months, depending on, but working with your physician on that, a sports med physician, not a regular physician, GP. I think there's a big distinct difference between a sport med physician that has endurance experience working in endurance sport versus a general practitioner because they look at things differently, more health-based versus performance and health-based combination. Um, but the thing I always come back to with people is, so first of all, no one, even whether you have a coach or not, no one knows your body and your responses to training and how you're feeling better than yourselves. So I'm a big fan of journaling and keeping your own personal logs on how you're feeling and a really simple 1 to 10 ranking like this was, or even simple sad, no feeling, happy. How did I feel after that? Because you will detect like, and then compare that with what you're trying to get out of your training session. So if you're doing a training session that's a hard interval training session with some hill runs, and there should be some significant fatigue and maybe even some muscle soreness after that, and you're like, okay, the next day that was hard. Oh, the next day that was my legs are sore. Well, that wouldn't be a sign to me to say that you're not sore. It would be a sign, or not that you're getting into the overtrain and injury state. It'd be saying my muscles are sore, but my actual knee tendon's actually really sore. That's a different thing. So logging those pieces and knowing what you should expect from your training sessions and comparing those to how you're actually feeling is really important. Um, Everybody's perception of soreness and pain or stiffness is different. And I think that you're the best judge for yourself on where things are at. The other thing I'd say is really important, which I think doesn't happen enough in age group athletes, is, and I don't know why it is. Maybe it's just access and availability. Is have a physio that's on your team. And when I said they're not a full time, but have someone that you can access and resource before you get injured and have some preventative check-ins when you can. It can save a lot of injuries by having some really good sport physios just before you do a big training block. Go in and get checked to see if there's any concerns from their side of the thing and let them know what you're doing. And then throughout that training block, you've got the ability to go back and communicate with that person.
I think that's a fantastic tip. The physio and sort of those prehab or just like just that assessment that you can pick up on things that that you can work on to hopefully eliminate the chances of injuries or just minimize those chances of injuries.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. People, we often do this as humans. We sort of leave it till them when we need it, right? But the biggest problem is when you need it, you're now scrambling to try to find someone and get in. I always try to encourage people to build those relationships before you need it because once you've seen that person properly, you're like, oh, listen, I got this issue. They're more inclined to maybe stay a little bit later and get you in to see you afterwards, or they're more inclined to know they already know your body. And so it's a much easier assessment. It says, ah, this is actually a little bit, we might want, this is different than when you came in before. So I talk about a little bit about that in the book is the importance of having a team. And that doesn't mean they're full-time paid people. It's not a luxury. It's just someone that you can access and knows who you are and you built a relationship with them.
Yep, that's fantastic advice. Um, Many athletes struggle with the mindset side, and so feeling guilty about rest or thinking more training equals more confidence. How do you coach someone to reframe that thinking and truly embrace recovery as part of performance?
Yeah, it's sort of a double question there. The first one, I think, when you said that, how do you encourage people to gain more confidence from their training? Um, the first thing I often say to people when people are not having enough recovery in their program is look at your training because it will show. Um, Training slower than you need to be on key moments, on key runs or key rides, or putting out not enough power and unable to do the workouts, that's a sign that you're training through that is not always an option. I actually, it's not always a good option because what will happen is you'll see that that won't give you confidence because you're not going to finish your workouts. Training with enough recovery to finish a hard workout gives you more confidence. The other thing I'd say on that is this is often I see this with elite athletes more so than age group athletes is that and especially in team sport, I see this a lot, is reframing what their job is, right? So for training adaptation to happen, you need to the hard work mentality, the grind it out mentality, the push through difficult sessions and pain, um, can only take you so far. And so the strategy I often use of that is like, you know, my my communication strategy is to say, look, I want your job to work hard. Like if you're a hard worker, working hard doesn't mean pushing through hard every session. I want you to work hard on recovering. I want you to work hard on eating the right foods because it's not easy for you. I want you to work hard on taking the time to recover when you really want to go out and actually ride your bike again. And we reframe that that's the hard work because they're not really doing the hard work when they go out and train. That's the stuff they like to do. The hard work is taking the moment to say, I'm not going to train today. It's taking the moment to recover today and then recover with purpose. Like, so recovery doesn't mean you're not on the bike or you're not in the pool or you're not running. Recovery means you're actually taking that intentional actions that you're doing, whether it be sitting on the couch if you need to, or whether it be taking the moment to not do a training session or to ride easy today because it's supposed to be an easy ride and not push hard because your friends are going hard. Like work hard at recovering and making sure you get your food and sleep and such. So you almost flip the switch to say that's your actual hard work.
That's fantastic. I really like that. And just like making sure it's aware that recovery is part of training. And I definitely know lots of people who just have that grind mindset of just that those high intensity intervals is the work, but it's like absolutely the recovery is the work as well. Um,
Yeah, and I think
so
that goes back to something we talked about earlier. Like Tim, is like I think um all too often I see people aren't really sure about what's the intention of every session that they do. And this even happens in team sports. It's like, I mean, I work with some players in the NHL and they go out and they do a training session with their team and they have no idea what the team session is. It's got to be hard, but they have no idea what the intent of the session is. So like if you don't know the intent of the session, you don't know how you should respond to it, and you don't know how you should be feeling coming out of that session. So really being clear and aligned that your actions, if I'm trying to actually like, I'm trying to do some high aerobic power type of intervals right now, what should that feel like? Or is it just that I'm going 2 minutes on and 2 minutes off?
absolutely. Patrick has a hand up. Absolutely, you can ask a question here. It's casual.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on the recovery talk. In terms of recovery, would you, when it comes to technology, would you rely on on your watch when you're looking at HRV to kind of set when you go back to training, if you're not feeling ready or not? Would you rely on technology for that, or is it mostly how your body feels and that type of stuff?
Yeah, so great question, Patrick. Like this, I get this in every sport. So first, I'll say right up front, I'm a huge fan of technology. I love technology. But I'm also, when I talk with people about it, they often think I'm anti-technology, and that's just not the case. What I've learned for years, and I'll speak specifically to HRV as you asked that question. I've used HRV now for 17 years in tracking endurance performance. We used to calculate it manually. We used to draw from the raw equations. I traveled with Triathlon leading into London 2012 using HRV, collecting every day with athletes. And there's a lot of things that HRV is really, really good for. Um, However, technology has created it so it's simple, right? And it's a complicated piece. And I love that they've created it so it's simple. So most technologies, there's a couple of things I'll say about technology. One, technology is really, really good for a lot of different attributes of training. So whether it's measuring load, whether it's measuring responses, whether it's different biometrics, whether it's how you're actually training within the training session, what's happening over longer periods of time. But remember that everything you get from technology is just often a number. So there's some sort of calculated way to get that number. There's some sort of process that's been done by the technology, and every company does that differently. Um, Not all companies, but I'm going to put a blanket thing here, is that there is no there is no like criteria that says you need to validate this in every population that you're going to prescribe for to use the technology. So we use these normative data sets that are massive, and there are thousands of people in the population to figure out what the responses are to create the algorithms to produce the results for you. And then they validate those against those algorithms. The reality is every one of you is a case of an N of one. There's not 1,000 people. You have your own very specific response. You have your own very specific range, especially when it comes to HRV. Somebody might be 20 to 30. That's how much they might vary all the time. Somebody might be 105 to 130. And people often say higher HRV is a way better number. And so when the algorithms come back for you in whatever device you're using, and it usually uses your data, but it bases it on the algorithms off of the entire population. So where I'm getting to this is that yes, it can be valuable to give you some insight, but you have to relate it to yourself and be able to look in that information. The second thing I'd say about that is that in all the time, 17 years, I've been using HRV, and I love HRV, by the way, so I'm not playing down on it, is that when something I've had, I can't count the number of times when HRV has signaled you're tired and the athlete's had a PB, or you're good to go and the athlete is like cooked. It's happened lots. And so why I say that is because it's one piece of information. And I would say, regardless of whether it's HRV or whether it's a recovery score from another watch, or whether it's a subjective response, or whether it's a power output number, everything you're getting from technology, and whether it's a sleep number and you had a really bad sleep score, everything you get from technology should be considered as a piece of information that you put into your own little matrix around how you work with yourself or your coach works with you. It's not, none of these things should be single deciding factors.
That's great input. We're definitely living in an age where we have no shortage of data and things that we can measure, and it's a bit of a wormhole as well. And just understanding that they're all just pieces to the puzzle and just kind of they contribute, and always just aligning with our own goals and how our body works.
Yeah. And the other thing I will say here too is you have to be careful, right? So when you use data and technology to track and prescribe your training, you're making changes to a somewhat training plan to direct your training based on the data. And that in itself influences the data. So you have to, and that's okay. I'm not saying you don't do that. I'm just saying you have to understand that it's actually influencing the data by if it's saying to recover, then you're going to take a recovery day. So your next score should be better. So you have to take these into consideration that it's just one piece of information that you have to take into your own little, call it your own personal context, and work with your coach or yourself if you're doing your own thing to decide on what's actually happening.
Absolutely. And I think on that, like sort of data and research side of things, we hear from many women that most research is still based on the male physiology. And so, from what we do know, how should female athletes think differently about adaptation or recovery or fueling for endurance racing?
So, that's first of all, one, I'd say yes, absolutely. The research is over the last, not just even 10, 15 years, the last 50 to 100 years has been predominantly done on males. And so there's a way less research from the female physiology. Um, so there's a couple things I say on that is we're still a long ways away from knowing the distinct differences between female physiology and male physiology in responses to training. Um, that said, is I would say that um, aside from being female and male, uh, I'm a big fan of understanding personal context as a whole. right? So when you think about whether it be two males that are comparing from a train, I don't have the same genetic makeup as the next person beside me. I don't have the same baseline cardiovascular physiology as the person beside me, as if it's another male. And so I think, yes, there are distinct differences between male and female, and the biggest being menstrual cycle and hormonal production. Those are the biggest ones that are different, for sure. But we have individual differences in physiology within sexes. So I'm a big fan of saying, let's come back to the personal context and understand what is your personal profile? What is your response? How do you respond to training? How do you respond to recovery? What are tools and strategies that work for you? And I'll say, so one of the big ones that's on social media. So I'm always on social media only to see what's going on, so I understand what people are talking about and what they're hearing. Not because I get my information from there, but it's always good to be one step ahead of what someone's going to ask you. Um, and on the female side, it's just about how women respond differently to cold tubs. Okay. Well, I know lots of athletes within the male population and also those within the female population that respond differently to cold tubs. So you can have two males that are completely different in how they respond to cold immersion, cold water immersion. Some of that's psychological, some of that's physiological. Some have more subcutaneous fat, some have less. Some have different fiber typing within their muscles, so they have different responses in how they feel about it. But ultimately, you're going to come back to that individual physiology. And so, while I don't have an answer to say that females should be doing this, this, and this, is I would say go back to understand what is your personal context. Are you in premenopause? Are you in perimenopause? Are you at what stage of you are you in your life at? Um, are you working? And then the last piece I'd say to that is if you are concerned or if you need special or certain attention to that, is to then work with a practitioner that's really specialized in that area. And this isn't just someone who throws up a shingle on Twitter and says, or social media or Instagram and says, I specialize in female health. It's understand what their credentials are and what makes them different.
We have a hand up from Tim Manning here. Quick question, Tim. Oops, I think I muted you accidentally.
Thanks very much, Ben. This is really informative, and I have a question for you. As an older, new age endurance athlete over 75, what advice would you have my own or an athlete over 75's their stage of physiology? What advice would you give them to be focusing on and thinking about? I got the whole element of purpose, but I'm thinking more about your workouts and recovery. Any quick tips that you might be able to pass on?
Yeah. So Tim, great question, and congrats to you. That's awesome. I love that you're 75 and pushing it. That's fantastic. Um, uh, my biggest thing here, first and foremost, is it really depends on what you've done leading up to being 75. So when I talk about an age-related decline curve, and so whether you were somebody that was sitting on the couch and you're starting to now start doing athletics or training for endurance sport, or whether you were someone that was active in a lot of different areas your whole life, and now you're starting to do something, because the starting points are very different. And
Let, let,
then the
let
second
me
thing,
let me
go ahead.
clarify that for you. Always been an
Sure.
active athlete.
Great. Great. And so what I would say then, what would be what were the sports that you had done?
Running, cycling, swimming is brand new, skiing, played football, played hockey at high levels.
So here's the quick things I would say, and I can't get it deep into your personal physiology on this one, Tim, but I would say a couple things here. One, if you've been playing all the sports, you probably got pretty good bone density, but we'd probably check it out to make sure there was no issues because you've got lots of load bearing in there. You probably have a pretty good cardiovascular engine because you've been doing a lot of that work over time. You're probably within, I would guess, if you've been doing that up until this point, you're probably within the top 10 to 15 percentile of your age group because most people aren't doing that. And so thinking about what it is, and then I would then look to say, what are you matching to your goals? Where are you at relative to now relative to there? And I'd be targeting those pieces. What I would really focus on are two things, though, is one, really avoiding injury. That would be the number one thing. So making sure that you have the number one thing I'd recommend off the bat is that you're active already, is making sure that you have a physiotherapist, not a physiologist, but a physiotherapist that you can work with regularly, and that when you are running, you're not building up some injuries, or when you're not swimming, you're not building up shoulder injuries or misuse injuries. The second thing I'd say is working with a physiologist or a coach in endurance sport that has experience working with someone over 75. And why I say that is because just being aware of the recovery times that will be required for you as an older athlete, as well as making sure that you're not pushing into areas that are going to challenge any sort of potential injury aspects. I know that doesn't give you specifics to you, but it's kind of difficult to do that right here.
No, I wasn't looking for specifics. I was just looking for general stuff. That's good information. Thank you.
Okay.
Awesome. I love the Q&A format, and I think that a lot of other people might have some questions brewing. So we'll finish off this fireside chat at least with one question around that you've worked with many elite performers across sport. And can you share a story where an athlete improved their output, not by adding more training, but by just simplifying, removing complexity or focusing on fewer higher quality elements?
Yeah. So I'll relay a story. I think I have a good one for this one. It's with cycling. It's with people that were two athletes that were training to do the Transalp Road Race. They were both 50 years old, so probably really relevant for your population right now. There was a group of eight of them that were going to go over and do um, the Transalp Road Race together. This was probably 12 years ago, 10 years ago now, at least, maybe maybe longer than that, 15 years ago. But it sticks out to me because everybody that they were training in their group of eight were had this program that was given to them from some coach. I don't know where it was. But the person that got this program was 15 years younger than everybody else. And so he was 35 and they were 50, but they were applying it to the entire group. And so they were all training on this program. And then two of the athletes reached out to me to have a discussion about it and say that they wanted to do something different because they felt it wasn't really working for them, and to just run my eyes over it. And I had a long chat with them about it and their backgrounds. And one of the things we talked about was, look, there was a ton of threshold work in it. There was a lot of, 3 to 5 minute intervals. There was some massive riding days. The volume was pretty high, plus the intensity was pretty high throughout the entire program. And one of the things that when I sat down and discussed with them was their objective for the race was to get through 7 days of the Transalps and not crack and still feel good at the end of it all. And so we talked a lot about why threshold training was part of the program, and why was it important or was it not important. Um, and one of the things that came up from that discussion was really about neither one of these athletes had ever done this type of volume before, had never done this type of uh, the climbing that was being done in these single days, not just the distance on the rides, but the 2,500 meters of climbing in a single ride. So they hadn't done a lot of that, and so what we came to a conclusion was, and the slight change we had to do, we actually simplified their program to get down to being saying, look, this is social for you. We have 6 months to get from A to B. We're going to build it so that you can actually ride back to back to back to back days. We're not going to do threshold training. You'll do some climbs where you're going to have fun and you're going to ride out socially, but we simplified the program. We mapped it out to the point where they were doing long, slow rides, and at that point, it was everybody's like, "Why, you shouldn't do that. You should do some more high intensity interval training." And the context was, as it went through it, two of the other athletes that were in that group that stuck with that program burnt out, and didn't make it to the Transalps because they were fully cracked from this program. The two athletes we were working with was I remember a specific day that they said they were a month out from their training. They were like, either we're going to fire you after this weekend or we're not. And I had them doing a lot of like steady riding, like just stay in control. Don't get into the red zone and understand because that's what you're going to have to do. They went out on a ride and they got dropped on the first climb and they just stuck to the plan. And after another hour of racing, the group regrouped over the top of the climb and an hour of riding as a group. They were at the front of the pack and still riding the exact same pace, and everybody else was out the back. And it was about simplifying the process to say what it is you're really trying to achieve in this event and not get caught up in what everybody else is doing or having this overcomplicated program that really isn't serving your purpose at all. And so I think it fits for this group today. Maybe I don't have enough details. I can't share enough of the details out of privacy for people, but I think it fits for this group today because it comes back to the concept of really being clear on what your objective is and aligning your actions and your preparation to help deliver on that objective.
No, that's a perfect story. It's like just coming back to what athletes want out of the experience, what the goals are, and you know what their profiles are, and it's a very individual world. There's not sort of a one size fits all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, awesome. So I'll stop recording here. Thanks so much for just the discussion on those great topics. It's inspiring to read the book and just gonna opens up the thoughts around like how to create training plans focused on the individual.